All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we are diving deep into the world of economics, specifically with excerpts from Economics for Everyone by Jim Stanford.
Oh, this is going to be good.
This book, it's like a crash course on capitalism, really
Yeah.
breaking it down.
Yeah.
So we're here to guide you through the most important ideas, the history of capitalism, how it actually works, what it does well, where it falls short, the whole 9 yards.
It's a fascinating read.
Oh, absolutely.
Stanford does a great job of making these complex ideas accessible,
Yeah,
anyone.
exactly. And he starts right off the bat
Yeah.
reminding us that economics, it's not just about like numbers and graphs and all that dry stuff.
Right.
It's really about how we as a society decide to organize our work, what we produce, and then how we decide who gets what, how those products are actually distributed.
Just about choices.
Exactly.
Relationship. It's a social science.
In Stanford, he makes this really compelling point early on that I think is so important. Everyone interacts with the economy, so we should all have a voice in how it works.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like, we're all in this together,
Yeah.
so let's figure out how to make it work for everyone. Right?
Absolutely.
And speaking of making it work, Stanford shares this really interesting anecdote about France and the U.S. that totally got me thinking.
Oh, yeah. The one where he talks about how French workers put in something like 300 fewer hours a year than American workers.
300.
But they still managed to produce the same value per hour worked.
Isn't that wild?
No, it's incredible.
300 hours? That's like an extra 7 weeks of vacation.
Can you imagine?
I mean, I can only dream. But here's the thing that really blew my mind. They still managed to maintain a really good standard of living.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, are we measuring economic success the right way if they can have all that extra time and still have a good life?
It challenges the assumption that more work automatically equals a better economy.
Maybe a successful economy is one that allows for a good quality of life,
Yes.
including leisure time
Leisure time.
alongside productivity.
It's like, what are we actually striving for here?
A real wake-up call.
Especially, in our culture where it feels like we're constantly on the treadmill.
Always hustling.
Yeah. It makes you realize there might be another way.
There might be.
A way to have a productive economy without sacrificing our free time and well-being.
Now, to really understand how we got here, we need to define what capitalism actually is.
Yeah, let's break it down.
So, Stanford describes it as a system where most production happens in private companies.
Okay.
And these companies are driven by the goal of making a profit.
Profit, that's the name of the game, right? Right.
And within this system, most people work for wages as employees.
Got it.
But here's a key takeaway, and he really emphasizes this. Capitalism is not some natural, inevitable law of the universe.
It's not.
It's not. It's a system,
Okay.
one that has evolved and changed over time. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe someday it'll be replaced by something else entirely.
That's a really interesting thought.
It is.
It's kind of liberating, right? We're not stuck with things as they are.
We have choices.
Yeah, we can choose to change the rules of the game if we want to.
To understand those rules better, Stanford takes us on this quick tour through the history of capitalism.
Oh, cool.
He starts with feudalism.
Feudalism, so knights and castles and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That was the dominant economic system in Europe for centuries before capitalism even emerged.
Okay.
And it was all about this rigid social hierarchy,
Okay.
where peasants were tied to the land and obligated to work for their lords. But then
Yeah.
over time, things started to change.
Like what?
New technologies,
Right.
expanding trade, a growing urban population.
Right.
All these factors started to chip away at the foundations of feudalism.
Interesting.
And that brings us to the Industrial Revolution.
Ah, the Industrial Revolution.
Stanford argues this was the real turning point. This is when we see the rise of factories,
Okay.
mass production,
Right.
and a whole new class of people, the capitalists, who own those factories and the tools of production.
Right.
And with the rise of factories, we see a new way of working, wage labor.
Wage labor.
So now people are no longer tied to the land, but instead they sell their labor to factory owners
Okay.
in exchange for wages.
I see.
And this shift had a profound impact on society.
Yeah.
It really created the foundation for modern capitalism.
Right. But I'm guessing this new system wasn't all sunshine and roses, was it?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
Stanford is very clear about the harsh conditions workers faced in those early factories.
Yeah.
Long hours, low wages, dangerous working environments.
Right. It's a reminder that the benefits of progress, they're not always shared equally.
Definitely not.
Yeah, and that the transition to capitalism was far from smooth or painless.
Not at all.
Okay, so now we have this new system, capitalism,
Yeah.
where private companies are calling the shots
Right.
and people are working for wages.
Uh-huh.
But, like, where does the value actually come from in this system?
That's a great question.
Yeah?
Stanford argues that all production, it ultimately boils down to human labor applied to resources from the natural world.
So work is the source of all value.
That's what he's saying. Like, think about it.
Yeah.
Everything around you, your clothes, your phone, the chair you're sitting on,
Yeah.
it all started with someone somewhere applying their labor to transform raw materials into something useful.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it that way.
And then he brings in the role of tools and machines.
Okay.
He explains how these things can increase productivity, allowing us to produce more with the same amount of labor.
Right.
But he stresses that these tools are only as useful as the human ingenuity behind them.
That makes sense.
They represent past labor.
Past labor.
The effort that went into designing and creating them.
So it's like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Exactly.
Like all this technology we rely on today.
Yeah.
It wouldn't exist without all the people who came before us.
The hard work and innovation of countless people.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing.
It is.
And that brings us to this really interesting point that Stanford makes about capital.
Oh, yeah.
There's this common idea that, capital...
Like money, machines, factories.
Yeah.
That it's inherently productive.
It magically creates value on its own.
Right. You hear that a lot. Like,
invest your capital and watch it grow.
Exactly.
Right.
But Stanford challenges that assumption.
Oh, really?
He says that the argument that capital is inherently productive, it relies on circular reasoning.
Circular reasoning.
It uses profit to define the value of capital.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, which doesn't really make sense when you think about it.
No, I guess not.
Because the profit only comes after the value has been created. So it's not that owning capital magically creates value.
Okay.
It's the combination of human labor and those tools and resources that actually generate the wealth.
Got it. So it's all about how we use those tools and resources
Exactly.
to create something new and valuable.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that leads us into another crucial aspect of capitalism.
Okay.
The immense power wielded by those who own and control the means of production.
So we're talking about the big corporations, right?
The big corporations.
Yeah.
Stanford doesn't pull any punches here.
Yep.
He talks about how their investment decisions have this huge impact on the economy,
Right.
on jobs, on wages, on pretty much everything.
Yeah. It seems like they have a lot of power.
They do.
Yeah.
He even compares large corporations to centrally planned economies.
Wait, like the Soviet Union?
Well, not exactly like that, but
Like
he
how?
points out how these corporations, they plan and coordinate production across these vast, complex networks, making decisions that affect the lives of millions of people.
So it's kind of like central planning, but within the private sector.
Exactly. It's a form of central planning.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, it challenges the idea that capitalism is all about, like, individual freedom and decentralized decision-making,
Right.
when in reality, a lot of power is concentrated in the hands of a few large corporations.
That's a really good point.
And that brings us to the question of who actually benefits from all this economic activity.
Yeah. Does everyone share in the prosperity?
Sadly,
Yeah.
Stanford highlights the shocking concentration of wealth
Okay.
in the hands of a tiny elite,
The 1%?
even smaller sometimes.
Wow.
He contrasts this with the limited financial wealth held by the typical household.
Yeah, like most of us.
Right, really driving home the point that the benefits of capitalism are not evenly distributed.
No, they're definitely not.
It's a stark reminder that even in a system that supposedly rewards hard work and innovation,
Right.
there are winners and losers.
Yeah. And the gap between them seems to be widening.
That's a worrying trend.
This concentration of wealth is also deeply intertwined with another crucial area, the labor market.
The labor market, so where we go to find jobs.
Exactly. Stanford describes it as the arena where workers, in essence, sell their ability to work to employers in exchange for wages.
So it's like a marketplace, but instead of goods and services, it's our ability to work.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But he points out the inherent power imbalance in this relationship.
In what way?
Workers need to work to survive.
Right, we need to pay the bills.
Exactly. So they're often at a disadvantage when negotiating with employers.
Who have a lot more leverage.
Exactly.
It's kind of like a game where one side is playing with much higher stakes.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And to make matters even more complex, Stanford introduces this concept of labor market segmentation.
Labor market segmentation, what does that mean?
So it means that the labor market isn't just this big homogeneous pool of workers all competing for the same jobs.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually divided into different segments. Some workers have access to better jobs, higher wages, more secure employment, while others are stuck in jobs with low pay, few benefits, little chance for advancement.
So it's not just about hard work and qualifications.
Right. It's not a level playing field.
Yeah, there are these structural barriers that limit opportunities for certain groups of workers.
Exactly.
That's a really important point to understand.
And that leads us into a topic that might make some people uncomfortable. Labor discipline.
Ooh, that sounds intense.
It is. Stanford gets real about how employers try to get the most work out of their employees for the lowest possible cost.
So they're trying to maximize their profits.
Exactly.
Okay.
He describes it as a system with both carrots and sticks.
Carrots and sticks. I like that analogy.
So the carrots would be things like bonuses and promotions.
Okay.
But what about the sticks?
Yeah, what are those?
The sticks are the things employers use to, well, keep workers in line. Think performance monitoring systems, the constant threat of job loss,
Right.
or even things like being denied promotions or raises.
So there's this constant pressure to perform.
There is.
Yeah, it makes you realize that even in a system supposedly based on free exchange,
Yeah,
there's a lot of power at play.
absolutely. Stanford is very upfront about the conflicting interests between employers and workers.
Right. Employers want to maximize profits.
Yeah.
And workers want fair wages and decent working conditions.
Exactly.
Sounds like a recipe for conflict.
It can be, but Stanford also acknowledges that it's not always a zero-sum game.
Okay.
He points out that when productivity increases, there's potential for wages to rise without hurting profits.
So there's some room for both sides to benefit.
Yes, but it's important to note that it's not automatic.
Right.
Workers have to organize, advocate for their rights,
Yeah.
push for policies that ensure a fairer distribution of those productivity gains.
It sounds like unions have an important role to play in that.
Absolutely.
Right.
You can't just rely on the invisible hand of the market to make sure everyone benefits.
Right. Sometimes you need a little bit of a push, a little bit of collective action.
Right. Now, before we move on, let's take a closer look at households.
Households, you mean like families?
Yes, he points out that households play a crucial role in the economy
Okay.
that's often overlooked.
In what way?
Well, think about all the work that's done within households.
Yeah, like taking care of kids, cooking, cleaning.
Exactly, all those essential tasks that keep families and societies functioning.
Right.
He argues that this work actually accounts for a huge chunk of total economic output.
It's true. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it doesn't show up in those official economic statistics.
Exactly, because it's not traded in the market, it's hard to measure its value in those traditional economic terms.
Right. It's kind of invisible.
But Stanford argues that we need to recognize and value this work because it's essential to the functioning of the economy.
So he's saying that families are kind of like mini economies in themselves.
In a way, yes.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
And he doesn't shy away from calling out the often gendered division of labor within households.
Right. Like it's still mostly women doing the majority of that unpaid work.
Exactly. And he points out that this contributes to women's unequal economic position in society.
Yeah, it's like a vicious cycle. Women are expected to do more unpaid work at home.
Yeah.
Which then limits their opportunities to participate in the paid workforce.
Limits their earning potential.
Exactly, which then reinforces traditional gender roles and economic inequalities.
It's a complex issue, and he doesn't shy away from tackling it head on.
Yeah, good for him.
He also highlights the role of households as consumers.
Consumers, yeah, we all got to buy stuff to survive.
Exactly, and he points out that in developed capitalist economies, consumer spending by households makes up a huge portion of total economic activity.
More than half.
Often more than half.
It makes sense. We're constantly bombarded with advertising, encouraging us to buy.
But he also raises some alarming points.
So,
He notes that many households are spending almost all of their income with little to no savings.
living paycheck to paycheck.
Exactly. Some are even going into debt just to keep up with their consumption.
Which makes you wonder, how sustainable is that in the long run?
Exactly. It highlights how precarious the financial situation is for many households.
Within this system.
Yeah, and this brings us to another crucial role that households play.
Okay, what's that?
They determine how much labor is supplied to the economy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, families make decisions about how many members of the household will work, for how many hours, and at what stages in their lives.
Right. Right.
These decisions are influenced by many factors.
Like the need to earn income, obviously.
Of course.
Yeah.
But also things like family preferences and priorities, like childcare availability and costs.
Yeah, all sorts of things.
Exactly. So families have a say in how much labor is available for businesses to hire.
So they're not just passive actors in this system.
Not at all.
They have some power
They do.
to influence the labor market.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
And their decisions have real impacts on the labor market and the broader economy.
This is getting really interesting. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion and seeing all these different parts of the economy and how they interact.
It is.
Yeah, what else does Stanford talk about?
Well, let's move on to another defining feature of capitalism.
Yeah.
Competition.
Competition. That
That's
sounds like a good thing.
It can be. Stanford explains how competition between businesses can drive innovation and efficiency.
Okay.
Companies are constantly trying to improve their products and processes.
To stay ahead of the game.
Exactly.
Right.
Ideally, this benefits consumers.
Yeah, we get better products, more choices.
Lower prices.
Right.
But Stanford doesn't shy away from the downsides of competition either.
What are some of the downsides?
Well, this relentless pursuit of profit can lead to some pretty harmful practices.
Like what?
Well, think companies cutting corners on safety,
Oh, right.
polluting the environment, or even exploiting workers.
Just to keep those costs low.
Exactly.
He calls those externalities, right?
Yes.
Like when the costs of production are shifted onto society or the environment,
That's it.
it's like they're not paying the full price
That's
for
it.
what they're doing.
He also points out that competition can lead to a lot of waste.
Waste? Like how?
Well, think about all the advertising we're bombarded with.
Oh, yeah.
Or products that are designed to become obsolete quickly, so we have to buy new ones.
Yeah, like planned obsolescence.
Exactly.
It's like the system itself encourages this constant cycle of production and consumption, even if it's not always in our best interest.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that the costs of competition need to be carefully weighed against its benefits.
So it's not this pure force for good that some people make it out to be?
Not necessarily.
Right.
It can be,
Yeah.
but it depends on how it's managed and regulated.
And how do we do that?
That's the big question.
Right.
And it brings us back to those power dynamics we were talking about earlier.
Okay. Competition can exacerbate the tensions between workers and employers.
In what way?
It creates incentives for companies to exploit their workers to gain an edge.
So it becomes a race to the bottom,
In some cases, yeah.
where companies are constantly trying to undercut each other on wages and working conditions.
And he points out that while competition can drive down prices,
Yeah.
it can also drive down wages and working conditions.
Right. It's a double-edged sword.
It is.
It seems like we need to find a way to harness the benefits of competition
Yes.
while also mitigating the downsides.
We need to find that balance.
Yeah, that sweet spot where we're getting innovation and efficiency without sacrificing fairness and sustainability.
Exactly.
Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into Jim Stanford's Economics for Everyone.
Picking up right where we left off.
I'm ready to unravel more of the mysteries of capitalism.
Excellent. So far, we've explored how capitalism works.
The good, the bad, and everything in between.
Yeah, the whole spectrum.
But where do we go from here?
That's the big question. Can we actually, improve this system, make it more fair, more sustainable, or are we just stuck with these flaws?
Yeah, is it possible to fix capitalism?
Well, Stanford tackles those questions head on.
He does.
He doesn't just describe the problems, he actually explores potential solutions.
And he even looks at alternative systems.
Yeah, he's not afraid to think outside the box.
He's not.
That's what I love about this book.
And one of the first things he points out is that capitalism isn't just one thing.
Like a monolith.
Yeah, there are different varieties,
Different flavors.
each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Like different flavors of ice cream, right?
Exactly.
Some are sweeter, some are richer.
Some are more tart.
Yeah. But they're all still ice cream.
They're all still capitalism.
So what are some of these different flavors of capitalism?
He talks about the Anglo-Saxon model, the one we see in the US and the UK.
Okay, yeah.
It's all about free markets, limited government involvement.
Right. The invisible hand doing its thing.
Exactly, and a pretty high tolerance for inequality.
So not a lot of social safety nets.
Right.
Okay.
Then there's the continental model.
Like in France and Germany.
Yeah, those countries.
Okay.
They have a stronger role for government in regulating the economy and providing social safety nets.
More of a social safety net.
Right, more of a focus on social welfare.
Okay.
And then you have the Asian model.
Okay.
Focus on export-driven growth,
Uh-huh.
often with heavy government involvement
Okay.
and a close relationship between businesses and the state.
So a bit more of a top-down approach.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's the Nordic model.
The Nordic model, which everyone always talks about.
Right, often seen as the poster child for social democracy.
Yeah, universal health care, education, strong social safety nets.
Exactly, a high level of social equality.
Okay, so Stanford is presenting all these different models, not to say that one is perfect. No,
Yeah, right.
right?
Cool.
He's just showing us that there's diversity within capitalism. Diversity within capitalism.
And that countries have made different choices.
Different choices in shaping their economies.
Right, there's not just one way to do it.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all system. We can actually tweak the recipe
You can tweak the recipe.
to create different outcomes.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting.
And to see how those outcomes actually differ, he compares key indicators across these models.
Like what kind of indicators?
Things like GDP per capita, poverty rates, inequality, environmental performance.
Okay, so he's looking at the big picture.
The big picture, how are people actually doing in these different systems?
Yeah, that's what really matters, right?
Exactly.
Not just how much money is being generated, but how are people's lives actually being affected?
And what does he find?
Yeah, what's the verdict?
Well, the results are pretty striking.
In what way?
Some capitalist economies perform much better than others.
When it comes to things like social well-being and environmental sustainability.
Yeah, the things that actually matter to people.
So who comes out on top?
The Nordic countries.
The Nordic countries again.
Yeah, they tend to do well on these measures.
They have those low poverty and inequality rates.
Yeah,
And they're doing a lot to protect the environment.
they are.
So it's a reminder that we can choose to structure our economies in a way that actually prioritizes these values.
We can choose to do things differently.
It gives me hope that we're not just locked into a system that produces inequality and environmental damage as these inevitable outcomes.
It's not a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
We have choices.
Now, Stanford, he doesn't just stop there.
He doesn't.
He actually lays out his own vision for a better form of capitalism.
He does.
And he calls it a high-investment, sustainable economy.
High investment, sustainable economy.
What do you think of when you hear those words?
I think of an economy that's not just focused on short-term profits,
Okay.
but on long-term sustainability.
Right, like thinking about the future.
Investing in things like renewable energy, education, infrastructure.
Yeah.
Things that will benefit everyone, not just the wealthy few.
Right, investing in the common good.
Exactly.
But it's not just about making money, it's about building a better future for all.
It's a more holistic vision.
It is.
He argues for more investment, but with a focus on social and environmental roles.
Like he's saying, let's invest in things that actually matter, not just things that make a quick buck.
So things like strengthening public investment in areas like renewable energy,
Okay.
education,
Yeah.
regulating financial markets to prevent reckless speculation.
To make things a bit more stable.
Right, and promoting fair trade practices.
Okay.
Practices that benefit both workers and the environment.
So it's a much more like socially conscious form of capitalism.
Yeah, it's a real departure from the neoliberal policies that have dominated for so long.
So it's a bold vision.
It is.
It is.
It's definitely a call for a more proactive approach.
Where governments play a bigger role in shaping markets
Yeah.
and making sure that economic growth translates into real progress for everyone.
Not just growth for growth's sake.
Right, but growth that actually benefits people and the planet.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about different models of capitalism, even some, like, variations on the theme.
Yeah, different flavors.
But does Stanford talk about any alternatives to capitalism altogether?
He does.
Oh, really?
He introduces the concept of socialism.
Socialism. That's a word that gets thrown around a lot,
It does.
often with very negative connotations.
Yeah, it's a loaded term.
But how does Stanford approach it?
He approaches it in a balanced and nuanced way.
Okay, good.
He explores the history of socialist experiments,
Okay.
acknowledging both the successes and the failures.
So he's not presenting it as some utopian solution.
No, not at all.
Okay.
He's very honest about the challenges
The challenge.
and complexities of building a different kind of economy.
It's not easy to just flip a switch and change the entire system.
It's not.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of thought and planning.
Yeah.
He talks about the various forms socialism has taken,
Like what?
from social democracy
Okay.
to centrally planned economies.
Like the Soviet Union.
Yeah, like that, highlighting both the achievements
Yeah.
and the shortcomings of those approaches.
That sounds like a fascinating and complex topic.
It is.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges he highlights?
Yeah. What are some of the things that have made it difficult to implement socialism in practice?
Well, he talks about the fierce opposition from powerful groups.
Yeah, the people who benefit from the status quo.
Exactly. They're not always keen on sharing their power and wealth.
Right. There's a lot of resistance to change.
There is.
And then he acknowledges the difficulties that some socialist projects have had with economic planning and management.
Yeah, like how do you actually coordinate all of this in a way that's efficient and equitable?
That's a big question, and there's no easy answer.
It's not as easy as just waving a magic wand and saying, let's have socialism.
Definitely not. It requires careful thought and experimentation. But Stanford doesn't just dismiss the potential of socialism as this, failed experiment.
No, he doesn't.
He still sees it as a viable alternative to capitalism.
He does.
And he argues that we need ongoing research and experimentation to develop new models. Models that can actually address the shortcomings of the current system.
Right. He's not saying we have all the answers.
Okay.
But he's encouraging us to keep searching for them.
I appreciate his willingness to, challenge our assumptions and consider different possibilities.
Absolutely. He wants us to think outside the box.
It's so easy to get stuck in that mindset that there is no alternative.
Yeah, that this is the only way.
Right. But Stanford's like, no, there are other ways.
There are other paths.
We just have to be willing to imagine them.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about different models of capitalism. We've talked about alternatives like socialism.
Yeah.
But how do all these theoretical concepts actually translate into the real world?
How do we see them playing out in our everyday lives?
Yeah, how do we make sense of all this?
Well, Stanford provides a really helpful tool for visualizing these relationships.
A tool, like what?
He calls it an economic map.
An economic map. Like a literal map.
Yeah, like a map of a city, but instead of streets and buildings, it shows economic flows.
Oh, that's interesting. So it shows how money moves through the economy.
Exactly. He starts with a simple model depicting the core elements of the capitalist system.
Workers, capitalists, households.
Yeah, the basic players.
Okay.
And then he shows the flows of income and spending between them.
It's kind of like a circulatory system with
Yeah.
money flowing between different parts of the body.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
And then he adds layers of complexity,
Okay.
incorporating things like the financial system, the government, the global economy, even the environment.
Wow, so it gets pretty detailed.
It does, but it's a really powerful tool
Yeah.
for understanding how all the pieces fit together.
So it's like a big picture view of how the economy actually works.
Exactly.
And how those different parts interact with each other.
Yeah. And he uses this map to explore a variety of real-world issues.
Like what kind of issues?
Well, things like the dynamics of investment,
Okay.
the causes of recessions,
Yeah.
the role of government spending,
Oh.
the impacts of globalization.
So it helps us see how these abstract economic concepts actually play out in concrete situations.
In the real world.
Affecting real people's lives.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the key insights that emerge from this economic map?
One of the most important is the concept of sectoral deficits and surpluses.
Deficits and surpluses. Ugh, I always get those mixed up.
Yeah, they can be confusing.
Remind me what those are again.
Okay, think of it this way.
Okay.
Different sectors of the economy, like workers, capitalists, the government, the rest of the world,
Yeah.
they can either spend more than they earn,
That's a deficit.
right, or they can spend less than they earn.
That's a surplus.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I'm following so far.
Good. And here's the key point. For the economy as a whole, these deficits and surpluses must always balance out.
So if one sector is spending a lot,
Yeah,
another sector must be saving a lot to offset that spending.
exactly. It's a fundamental accounting principle,
Right, it'd have to add up
but it has some profound implications.
for understanding how the economy works.
Yeah, for example, it helps us understand why government budget deficits.
Where the government spends more than it takes in.
Right.
Okay.
Why those can sometimes be necessary.
To do what?
To stimulate demand during a recession.
Okay, so sometimes it makes sense for the government to go into debt.
To help boost the economy.
Okay, interesting.
Or it can help us understand how trade deficits arise.
When a country imports more than it exports.
Exactly.
Right.
It's a reminder that in economics, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Right. Someone always has to pay the piper.
Someone has to pick up the tab.
So, besides deficits and surpluses,
Yeah.
what other insights can we get from this economic map?
Well, Stanford uses it to explain this concept of injections and leakages in the economy.
Injections and leakages. It sounds a bit like plumbing.
It kind of is.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Spending by one sector
Okay.
can create income for another sector.
Okay.
And this can create a multiplier effect,
A multiplier effect.
where that initial injection of spending
Okay.
leads to a larger overall increase in economic activity.
So, like, one person's spending is another person's income, and then that income gets spent again, creating this ripple effect.
Exactly. It keeps circulating.
But he also points out that some of this income can leak out
Leak out of the circular flow.
of the circular flow of the economy.
Right. And this can happen through things like savings, taxes, imports.
So the money's going somewhere else.
It's not being spent directly back into the economy.
Okay.
And the balance between these injections and leakages,
Yeah.
that balance is crucial for understanding the overall level of economic activity
Okay.
and the potential for growth.
So if there are too many leakages, the economy can slow down.
It can lose momentum.
And if there are more injections,
Yeah.
it can speed up.
It can gain momentum.
It's all about that balance.
Finding an equilibrium.
Equilibrium. Okay, so let's talk about something that everyone experiences but no one likes. Economic recessions.
Recessions.
Ugh, they're never fun.
They're not.
What does Stanford have to say about them?
Well, he uses his economic map to show how a downturn in one sector
Okay.
can spread throughout the entire economy, creating this vicious cycle.
Of what?
Declining spending, declining production, declining employment.
It's like a domino effect where one domino falling knocks down a whole row.
That's a great way to think about it.
So, for example, if there's a drop in investment,
Mm-hmm.
that can lead to layoffs,
Yeah,
which then reduce consumer spending.
because people have less money,
Right.
which then leads to further business cutbacks and more job losses.
Oh, man, it's like a downward spiral.
It can be.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about.
It is a sobering illustration of how interconnected the economy is.
And how easily a shock in one area can create this downward spiral.
So, what can trigger these recessions?
Yeah, what sets off that chain reaction?
Well, Stanford explores a range of factors:
Like what?
financial crises,
Okay.
bursting asset bubbles,
Mm-hmm.
sharp declines in consumer confidence.
Like when everyone gets scared and stops spending.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or even external shocks like wars or natural disasters.
So these recessions can come from all directions
They can,
Yeah.
but the severity and duration,
of these recessions.
yeah, those can vary,
Depending on what?
depending on a number of
We'll
factors.
take a look.
The initial trigger,
Okay.
the policy responses
From the government.
from governments and central banks,
Okay.
and the underlying resilience of the economy.
So some economies are better equipped to handle these shocks than others.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom.
It's not.
There are things we can do to mitigate the impact of these recessions.
To make them less severe, less long-lasting.
And what are some of those things?
Well, that's where government policies come into play.
Government policies, like what kind of policies?
They can use fiscal policy,
Fiscal policy, meaning?
spending and taxation
Okay.
to try to smooth out these fluctuations.
So like spending more during a downturn?
Yeah, to stimulate demand,
Okay.
and then maybe taxing more during a boom to kind of moderate things, prevent overheating.
So they're acting like a sort of economic shock absorber
Exactly, to cushion the blow.
of these economic ups and downs.
Stanford points out that government spending on things like public infrastructure or social programs,
Okay.
those can act as automatic stabilizers.
Automatic stabilizer.
They inject spending into the economy during recessions
Right.
and help to cushion the blow for those who are most affected.
The people who are struggling the most.
Right. He's critical of policies like balanced budget laws.
Where the government has to balance its budget every year.
Yeah, no matter what.
Okay.
Because that forces governments to cut spending or raise taxes during recessions.
Which often makes the downturn even worse.
It's counterproductive.
Yeah, it seems
Yeah.
counterintuitive to cut spending when the economy is already struggling.
He argues for what are called counter-cyclical policies.
Counter-cyclical, so doing the opposite of what the economic cycle is doing.
Exactly.
So running deficits during recession.
Spending more than they take in.
Right.
Okay.
And then running surpluses during booms.
Saving more than they spend.
Exactly.
Okay.
He argues that these counter-cyclical policies are much more effective at stabilizing the economy.
And promoting long-term growth.
Right. It's about taking a long-term perspective.
Yeah, not just focusing on the short-term ups and downs.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit.
Okay.
Stanford also explores this fascinating concept
Yeah.
known as long waves in capitalist development.
Long waves. Sounds intriguing.
It is.
What are those?
He describes them as extended periods of economic expansion.
lasting for several decades,
Wow, long periods.
followed by periods of slower growth.
Or even stagnation.
Right, so kind of like these long-term cycles.
So it's like a boom and bust cycle, but on a much grander scale.
Exactly, on a much longer time horizon.
And what drives these long waves?
Well, he argues that they're often driven by major technological innovations,
Okay.
which create new industries, new investment opportunities, and big productivity gains.
Leading to a sustained period of economic dynamism.
A lot of activity, a lot of growth.
Okay, so give me some examples of these long waves.
Okay, so he talks about the rise of railroads in the 19th century.
Okay, that was a huge transformation.
Yeah, it changed everything.
Yeah.
The mass production revolution in the early 20th century.
Like Henry Ford in the assembly line.
Exactly. And then, of course, the information technology boom.
In recent decades.
Yeah, which we're still experiencing.
So are we currently riding a long wave?
That's a good question, and Stanford suggests that we might actually be at the tail end.
The tail end?
The information technology wave.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as the growth potential of that revolution starts to fade.
It makes you wonder what the next big technological breakthrough will be.
What's next?
Yeah.
And what kind of economic transformation it will bring.
That's an exciting question.
It is.
Yeah, it highlights these long-term dynamics of capitalism.
Yeah.
And reminds us that this system is constantly evolving and adapting
Always changing.
in response to all these different forces. Technological change, political forces, social pressures.
It's never static.
It's dynamic.
It's always in flux.
Yeah, it's a bit like a living organism, constantly evolving.
It is. It's a complex adaptive system.
That's a good way to put it.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities.
It is.
But also a bit daunting.
Yeah, to consider the challenges.
To think about what might go wrong.
But Stanford doesn't shy away from those challenges, does he?
He does.
He actually dedicates a whole chapter to evaluating capitalism's overall performance.
He does. It's like a report card for the system itself.
Yeah, how'd capitalism do?
Well, he takes a step back
Okay.
from all the details. And he asks this really fundamental question.
What's the question?
How well does capitalism actually perform?
Okay.
Not just in terms of economic growth.
But in terms of meeting the broader needs of humanity.
Yeah, the big picture, how are we doing as a species?
It's a big question.
It is.
How does he go about answering it?
Well, he lays out a set of criteria
Criteria for what?
for evaluating capitalism's performance.
Okay, like a checklist.
Yeah, kind of like a rubric.
Okay, so what's on this checklist?
Things like prosperity,
Okay, that's important.
security,
Yeah, people feeling safe and secure,
sustainability,
protecting the environment,
innovation,
coming up with new ideas, new technologies,
waste,
having options, freedom,
democracy,
people having a say in how things are run,
and equality.
making sure that everyone has a fair chance.
Yeah, a more level playing field.
Okay, so he's looking at all these different aspects, not just the economic bottom line.
Exactly.
So how does capitalism actually measure up against these criteria?
Well, he finds that capitalism has achieved some remarkable successes.
Like what?
Well, generating wealth,
Yeah, it's definitely done that.
driving technological innovation.
We've seen incredible advances
Yeah, in technology, medicine, living standards.
in many parts of the world.
Absolutely.
So it's hard to argue with that.
But he also finds that it falls short in other areas,
Sometimes dramatically so.
sometimes dramatically so.
So what are its biggest failings,
Well, he points to persistent poverty and inequality.
despite all that wealth generation?
Yeah, it's not being distributed evenly.
Okay.
He points to the ecological damage,
Caused by its relentless pursuit of growth.
always wanting more, more, more,
Okay.
and the erosion of democratic values.
How so?
Well, as corporations exert increasing influence,
Over political decisions.
right? Money talks in politics.
Yeah, that's a big concern.
So it's a system that creates both immense wealth
And deep inequality.
while also putting a strain on the environment.
And threatening democratic institutions.
It's a mixed bag.
It is a mixed bag, yeah.
He also argues that capitalism's inherent instability,
Yeah, those booms and busts.
those cycles create a sense of insecurity,
For a lot of people.
even those who are relatively well off.
Because you never know when the next downturn is coming.
Exactly. You're always kind of on edge.
Right, like, what if I lose my job? What if the market crashes?
That anxiety is always there.
And he also critiques the concentration of economic power
Yeah.
in the hands of a small elite.
A very small group of people.
And he argues that this undermines democratic values.
Because they have so much influence over the political process.
It's hard for ordinary people to have a meaningful say.
When so much power is concentrated in the hands of a few.
It feels like the system is rigged against us.
And his overall assessment.
Yeah, what's the final verdict?
is that capitalism is a system with significant flaws
Okay.
and that it requires fundamental reforms, big changes.
If it's going to meet the challenges of the 21st century,
The challenges we're facing
the
today.
challenges we're facing today, climate change, inequality, political instability.
All of those things.
Yeah. So he's not giving up on the system entirely,
He's not.
but he's calling for major changes.
Major changes.
Okay.
He's saying we need to confront its shortcomings
Honestly and openly.
and work towards creating a more just
And sustainable and democratic economic system.
He's not just criticizing, he's offering solutions.
That's what I like about him.
He's trying to find a way forward.
A way to make things better.
And he takes it a step further.
He does.
He explores potential vulnerabilities of capitalism.
Vulnerabilities, like weaknesses.
Yeah, like cracks in the foundation.
Okay.
And he asks this question: where might these internal contradictions
The contradictions within the system itself.
and external pressures
From outside the system
Yeah, where might those lead?
to crises.
To crises or even a systemic breakdown.
The breakdown of the whole system.
It's a scary thought.
It is a bit scary.
But he thinks it's important to consider these possibilities.
So, what kind of vulnerabilities does he identify?
Well, he points to the inherent instability of financial markets.
Yeah, we've seen how those can go haywire.
We have.
Okay.
He talks about the ecological limits of a finite planet.
Right. We can't just keep growing forever.
And on a finite
on finite resources.
Exactly.
Okay.
He talks about the persistence of global poverty and inequality,
Despite all our efforts.
despite all our efforts.
Okay.
And he talks about the potential for political backlash
Backlash against what?
against a system that's perceived as rigged in favor of the wealthy.
Like people getting fed up and saying enough is enough.
Exactly.
Okay. That's a real possibility.
It is.
Yeah.
It's happened before.
And it could happen again.
It could.
So he's basically saying that even seemingly stable systems,
Yeah, systems that seem rock solid.
they can have these hidden weaknesses
Cracks in the facade.
that could lead to their undoing.
It's a sobering thought,
It is.
but it's an important one to consider.
So what's a takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think Stanford's analysis highlights the urgent need to rethink our economic model,
To come up with something better.
to explore new ways of organizing production, distribution, consumption,
Ways that are more what?
more equitable,
Okay.
more sustainable,
Uh-huh.
and more resilient.
Resilient in the face of all these challenges.
Exactly. The challenges we're facing now and the challenges that are coming down the road.
So it's not just about fixing the problems we have now.
It's about building a system that can handle future challenges as well.
That can adapt and evolve.
Exactly.
It's like we're standing at a crossroads.
Yeah, we have a choice to make.
And we need to choose a path that leads to a better future for all.
And that choice is ours to make.
It is.
Stanford's exploration of these vulnerabilities is a call to action.
A call to do what?
To think critically,
Okay.
to be open-minded,
To new ideas.
to new ideas, to alternative approaches,
To be willing to question the status quo,
to challenge our assumptions.
because the way we do things now might not be the best way.
It might not be the best way to meet the challenges of the future.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking discussion.
It has.
It really has.
It'll challenge my assumptions about how the economy.
All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dives into Jim Stanford's Economics for Everyone.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've explored the ins and outs of capitalism, its historical evolution. We've even considered some alternative paths.
Yeah, we've really gone deep.
We have, but now as we wrap things up, let's focus on, the most important lessons Stanford wants us to take away from all this.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me throughout the book is his emphasis that economics, it's not this detached, purely academic subject.
Right. It's not just about theories and equations.
It's woven into human values, power dynamics, political choices, all of which impact your daily life.
It's about real people making real decisions.
Exactly. And those decisions have consequences.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, don't let anyone tell you that economics is just the way it is.
Like it's some unchangeable law of nature.
Yeah, like we have no say in it.
We created these systems and we can change them.
That's a powerful message, I think,
Yeah.
especially in a world where it often feels like we're just at the mercy of these giant economic forces.
What about you? What parts really stood out to you?
For me, it's his constant emphasis on critical thinking,
Yeah.
He challenges us to question assumptions, to look beyond the surface.
To really dig into those power structures.
Yeah, and the consequences of economic decisions.
And not just accepting things at face value.
Exactly. And, he empowers us to be active participants
not just passive bystanders.
in shaping the economic world we live in.
He doesn't want us to be just cogs in the machine.
No, he wants us to be informed, engaged citizens who can advocate for a better economic future.
And to help guide us on that journey, he actually provides this concise list
A list.
of 12 key takeaways.
12 key takeaways.
Almost like a roadmap for navigating the complexities of economics.
Okay, that sounds helpful. So what's number one on Stanford's list?
Well, he starts by reminding us that all value ultimately comes from productive human activity.
So work is the source of all value.
That's what he's saying. Tools and machines, they can enhance our productivity.
Right.
But they're only as useful as the human ingenuity and effort behind them.
It's like we're the ones who make those tools work.
Exactly.
It makes you realize that work isn't just about earning a paycheck. It's about creating value, contributing to society.
Building a better future.
What's the next takeaway?
The crucial role of investment.
Investment. Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
It's the engine of economic growth, but it's important to understand how investment decisions are made.
And what factors influence them?
Right, like we talked about how businesses consider things like interest rates, political stability, government policies when deciding where to invest.
Right.
And he stresses that investment should be directed towards socially beneficial goals, not just short-term profits.
Like, what are we actually investing in?
And who benefits from those investments?
It's about making sure those investments are actually serving the common good.
What else? Well, he reminds us that the economy functions as this complex, interconnected system.
Yeah, we talked about the economic map, right?
Exactly, where changes in one area can ripple out and impact the whole.
It's like a spider web.
Touch one part and the whole thing vibrates.
Right, it's all connected. We can't just think about things in isolation.
And of course, we can't forget his point about the inherent instability of capitalism.
Those booms and busts.
Stanford argues that we need well-designed policies to manage those fluctuations and make the economy more resilient. It's about building in some shock absorbers.
To cushion the blow of those inevitable economic ups and downs.
So the whole system doesn't collapse.
Now, another key takeaway for me
Yeah.
was the role of government,
Governments play a huge role.
Stanford's very clear about that.
They can either make things better or worse through their policies, regulations, and spending decisions.
He doesn't subscribe to that government is always the problem
Yeah,
mentality.
not at all.
He sees a vital role for government in regulating markets, providing essential services.
And ensuring a fair distribution of income and wealth.
It's about creating a level playing field, right?
Exactly. And making sure the economy works for everyone, not just a select few.
He also challenges this idea that economics is all about efficiency,
Yeah, like efficiency above all else.
with fairness and social justice being secondary concerns.
He argues that those things are inseparable,
Like, you can't have one without the other.
that economic decisions always have social and ethical dimensions.
It's about more than just the bottom line.
It's about people's lives.
And he wants us to be globally aware.
Yeah, he emphasizes the interconnectedness of national economies and the challenges and opportunities presented by globalization.
It's a globalized world. We can't ignore that.
We're all in this together.
But how do we make sure that globalization benefits everyone?
That's the question, right?
Are the rules of the global economy promoting a race to the bottom on wages and environmental standards?
Or are they creating a more just and sustainable global order?
Those are great questions to consider.
Ultimately, Stanford wants us to remember that economics is about real people, real lives, and the future of our planet.
It's not just some abstract academic subject. It's something that affects us all.
And we all have a role to play in shaping it.
I love how he ends the book with a call to action,
Yeah, he doesn't just leave us with a bunch of information and say, good luck figuring it out.
He actually encourages us to get involved, to learn more, to ask questions, to demand better.
He wants us to be active citizens, not passive consumers.
So what are some things listeners can do to put these ideas into action?
Well, he encourages us to be informed voters, to support candidates and policies that align with our values,
You have to do your research.
to join organizations that are working for economic justice and sustainability,
Find your people. Join the movement.
to have conversations with your friends and family about these issues,
Spread the word.
and to be critical consumers,
Think about where you're spending your money.
considering the social and environmental impact of your purchasing decisions.
It's about making conscious choices that reflect our values and contribute to a more just and sustainable world.
Voting with your dollars.
And about being active citizens, engaging in the political process, and demanding better from our leaders.
Holding them accountable.
Yeah, we have more power than we think
We do.
to shape the world we want to live in.
It's up to us to use it.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into economics for everyone.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise, this book has really opened my eyes to new ways of thinking about the economy and my place in it.
It's given us a lot to think about.
It has, and I hope it's done the same for you, our listeners.
We encourage you to check out Economics for Everyone yourself.
It's a real game changer.
And as always, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.